Hi, welcome back. Our previous lesson was on determinant of price elasticity of supply. Today, we'll be looking at how taxes on sellers shape equilibrium outcome. So taxes represent marginal cost to sellers because it's an additional cost they must pay for each unit they sell. So when the marginal cost increases, the supply curve shifts, because the supply curve is also the firm's marginal cost. Anything that increases or decreases the marginal cost will shift the supply curve either to the left or to the right. Now, taxes are a mandatory contribution levied on corporations or individuals to finance government activities and public services. So, example of a tax on sellers may be that if the government can say for every product that you sell, you have to pay £1 or £2 as a tax. Now, let's look at how such a regulation on sellers can affect equilibrium outcome, which is equilibrium quantity or equilibrium price. So, consider the graph represented here for the market of apples. Before the government ever steps in to implement any tax, equilibrium occurs where the supply curve and the demand curve intersect, and in this example, it occurs at point A. So this is our old supply curve and our demand curve before any tax was implemented or any tax was put on sellers. So the equilibrium price here will be 4. So our equilibrium price is £4. And the corresponding quantity, which is the equilibrium quantity, will be 100 apples. Now, let's assume that the government introduced a tax of £1 per apple sold. So every apple that the seller will sell, you'll have to pay £1 as tax to the government. Now, you can see from the graph that the supply curve will shift up by £1. So the intersection of the supply curve here is 2. When there's a tax of £1, the marginal cost of producing each apple is going to increase by £1. So the supply curve is going to decrease by that same margin. So you can see that it decreases, the intersection increases to 3, which indicates a decrease in the supply. So when you're considering taxes, it's much easier to say that the supply curve will go upwards when there's a decrease and then will go downwards when there is an increase. So in this example, taxes are going to shift the supply curve upwards, increasing the intersection from 2 to 3. So a simple explanation for this is that since the supply is the marginal cost curve, if the marginal costs are £1 higher, then the supply curve must shift £1 up. So this is represented by a shift from this old supply curve to a new supply curve, and our intersection here increases by £1. Now, taxes raise marginal cost for sellers by £1. So they will only sell if the price is £1 higher for each apple. So a new equilibrium occurs at the point where the new supply curve meets the demand curve. And in this case, it's represented by point B here. So our new supply curve will intersect our already existing demand curve. Now, the price buyers pay after the tax will increase, and the price sellers receive after the tax will fall. Now, to see what the new price buyers are paying and sellers are receiving, let's analyze the effect of this tax. Now, before the tax was implemented, equilibrium price is 4. Now, after the tax was implemented, prices increased to 4.5. So let me say new price is 4.5. And equilibrium quantity reduced from 100 to 90. So new quantity is 90 apples. Now 4.5 here is the price that consumers are paying now. So for every apple bought, the price has increased from 4 to 4.5, which means that the price buyers pay after the tax rises by 0.5 pounds. So the old price the buyers are paying, old price for buyers was 4. The new price now is 4.5. So the difference is 0.5. So this is the new price the buyers are paying, and this is the difference. Now similarly for producers, the old price that producers were receiving was £4, and the new price that producers are receiving now is 3.5. Now to understand this in simple terms, when consumers or buyers pay 4.5 to producers will now have to pay £1 out of that 4.5 pounds to the government as tax. So the new price that they are now receiving is the 4.5 minus the £1 tax, which is 3.5. So the new price producers are receiving is 3.5, and the difference is also 0.5. So the effect of the tax is such that the price buyers pay after the tax rises by 0.5, that is from £4 to 4.5, and then the price that sellers receive after the tax also falls by 0.5, that is from 4 to 3.5 pounds. Now some things to note about this example here is that the tax leads to a decline in quantity sold. So we can see that quantity sold reduced from 100 apples to 90 apples. And also the tax increases the price buyers pay, but decreases the price sellers receive. So it increases the price buyers pay from 4 to 4.5, but decreases the price that sellers receive from 4 to 3.5. Now the next thing to note is that both buyers and sellers bear the economic burden of the tax on sellers. So there's an important distinction between who is assigned by the government to send a tax payment and who ultimately bears its economic burden. The statutory burden of a tax describes the burden of being assigned by the government the responsibility of sending a tax payment. But then the economic burden describes the burden created by the change in after-tax prices faced by buyers and sellers as a result of the tax. In this example, the statutory burden is entirely on sellers. That means that the burden to present a tax payment was put on sellers. However, buyers and sellers each bear some of the economic burden. In this example, buyers and sellers shared the burden equally. You can see that buyers now get a 0.5 increase in the price that they pay, and producers also get a 0.5 decrease in the price they receive. So they have shared the economic burden equally between the two parties, 0.5 out of the £1 tax. But even though in this example they share the burden equally, it's not always the case. It could be that buyers can pay a higher proportion as compared to what sellers pay, or sellers can pay a higher proportion as compared to what buyers pay, or One party can pay all of it and the other party will pay nothing. And all of this is determined by how elastic the demand or the supply curve is, which we'll be visiting in our subsequent lessons. So this is all that we have for our lesson on how taxes on sellers shape equilibrium. Our next lesson will be how taxes on buyers shape equilibrium outcome. If you enjoyed today's lesson, consider subscribing. Thank you.